Hello, everybody. I am Marcos Molitzis. I'm here with Carrie Eleveld. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Kos, The Brief, our weekly show about politics. Today, we are going to be talking about the first 100 days. The first 100 days of Joe Biden, but also the first 100 days of a post-President Donald Trump and his Republican Party. So it's going to be an interesting show. Carrie and I have been writing extensively on both those topics for the last 100 days. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to actually be each other's guests. I would venture to say that we're pretty good on this issue. I think Carrie's one of the best writers on the topic of the collapse of the Republican Party. And so we every once in a while, I think wouldn't be a bad idea for us to sort of check in on ourselves and sort of plumb our own expertise on these issues. Next week, we'll get back to having some cool guests. But today, it's going to be us. Carrie, how are you doing?
I am doing okay, hanging in there. I mean, excited to talk about Biden's first 100 days, which I think have been pretty good, and the implosion of the Republican Party, which doesn't mean that it's non-existent or that it's not a problem or that, that we don't have to worry about 2022 or 2024. I'm not saying any of those things. I'm just saying unity is just a word for circular firing squad. That's all I'm saying.
Indeed it is. So we're going to start. Let's start with Joe Biden. And there is a sort of realization in the media world that a great way to kill your traffic to a story is to use the word Joe Biden in a headline. And reporters, media organizations have actually A/B tested with Biden, without Biden. And the word Biden turns people off. If you look at our Daily Kos statistics, yes, out of the top 100 stories over the last month, only one had the word Joe Biden. Only one centered Joe Biden in the headline. And that was
yours.
And that was me talking about how wrong I was about Joe Biden. So it had an interesting hook. And this is actually a very interesting sort of notion because there was an interview somewhere, Washington Post, I think, where a Democrat was interviewed, and he said the best part about Joe Biden being president is I don't have to think about Joe Biden being president. And I don't know about you, Carrie, but I still have a little PTSD in the morning where I wake up thinking, like, what horrible thing happened overnight, just expecting some Twitter outburst from Donald Trump. And then it's actually nice things.
I don't wake up thinking that. I mean, I have trouble sleeping for other reasons, but that's not one of them. Thank goodness. I mean, seriously, I have felt like Trump, de-Trumpified ever since Twitter yanked his platform. And, I don't know, Twitter said he would never be reinstated, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I feel so much better without him. Sorry.
Facebook is talking about potentially, or at least they have their board. They have an appeals, like a Supreme Court of Facebook. That's going to be, I got to say, he would do damage on Facebook, but Facebook's already a cesspool of disaster. And Trump's real power, weirdly, and I still don't quite understand the dynamics, but really it was about Twitter. It was about dominating that political narrative. And oh my God, we're starting to talk about Donald Trump. Let's save Donald Trump. Like, we still want to hate on Donald Trump, but talk about Joe Biden, which apparently is death for headlines. But here's the thing about Joe Biden. It's very. Stay
tuned. Don't go anywhere because this is going to be fun. Right. This is good. Don't turn us off just because we're talking Biden. We're talking, we're talking massive potential historic changes, big structural change, as Senator Elizabeth Warren used to say. So stick with us.
So, I mean, that's one of the interesting things, though, and I definitely have written about this and noted this, that Joe Biden clearly ran to the right of Elizabeth Warren, big structural change, and Bernie Sanders, revolution. And he sort of, at least in the primary election, this was before, COVID slammed hard, right? But at least during the primary, which was 2019, he was very much the let's go back to the Obama years. Let's go back to a boring presidency. Let's go back to normalcy. And if you looked at his body of work over 50 years, I mean, this is not a guy who just showed up, right? I mean, this is had a track record, and you saw he voted for the Iraq War. Not only did he vote for it, but he shepherded the war authorization in a committee he led at the time, right? He was the guy who pushed through the hated crime bill. He was a senator from MBNA, right? Because Delaware is headquarters to almost all the credit card companies, or at least was before consolidation. I don't know anymore. So he had a track when he talked about going back to what was normal. It was clear that there was a Joe Biden legacy that was very much about status quo.
Right.
And so you had the Warren-Bernie wing agitating for structural change. And the Joe Biden side, Joe Biden himself won because Black voters in South Carolina took a look at America, took stock of our racism and our sexism as a nation, and decided that getting rid of Donald Trump was too important to risk on a country that they did not trust. At the time, I respected the decision, but I did not agree with it. And I think when I wrote this piece, I was wrong. One of the key tenets is that South Carolina African-American community was right, because Biden did not win by much. I mean, again, you can look at the Electoral College vote and you could say, oh, he won by the same margin that Trump won.
You're saying he didn't win by much in the general election. He ended up sweeping, after 4 initial losses, he ended up sweeping the Democratic primary basically. But yeah,
But there was a funny thing that happened, and is that he did not win the general election by much. If you flip 80,000 votes, 70,000 votes in 4 states, Donald Trump is
actually 40,000. If you're looking at it's really an election that ended up turning on 40,000. If you look at what Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin.
And that was enough. I think Nevada, you might need Nevada in there too, but maybe I'm wrong. I can't.
That might be true, but I think it was closer to 40. Anyways, it doesn't matter. It was close
by a lot.
It was close. Yeah.
Yes, and to think that the boring old white guy, as I kept describing him as, and it still is because he's death on headlines apparently, but this boring old white guy barely beat Donald Trump, and Republicans did not know how to run against him. They couldn't get that anger. And even now, we just saw last week, there was a poll that showed that voters think that Joe Biden is more moderate than Barack Obama was. And by every possible measure, there's no way you could say that Obama was more progressive, more leftist than Joe Biden has been. But clearly, race.
Not in office, not as president, right, for sure. Unbelievably, no. Yeah.
And so if you had Kamala Harris president or President Elizabeth Warren doing the exact same things that Joe Biden is doing, things would look a lot different now. The country would be like, it's a socialism, right?
Listen,
but it's Uncle Joe.
It's Uncle Joe. What I think one of Joe Biden's strongest characteristics has turned out to be is his ability to be wrong and not worry about it. I've said this before. He is playing, he's working president as a guy who, isn't worried at all about being wrong. It's not the phrase that I'm looking for isn't coming to me, but it doesn't matter. The point is
he's evolving though. Like, I didn't think he could evolve.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely evolved. But this is what I'm saying. I mean, look, the energy isn't in what happened in the primary. The energy is what he's doing moving forward. And he has been willing on so many counts to say, the times have changed. They call for something different than what I ran on, especially in the primary, because when he was running in the primary and started to win the primary, We were still in the beginning throes of the pandemic and how it devastated the economy and the incredible need that created among many people who were suffering and losing more than, and not ultimately, but already having lost now more than 500,000 Americans. I mean, it just, the circumstances changed, and he allowed the circumstances to change how he was going to govern. And I just think that the energy is looking forward and not backward now, because he isn't, whoever that was, that's not how he's governing in the primary. And actually, a lot of that, I would say that a lot of the stuff he's doing now in terms of the COVID relief plan, which is obviously already passed and is being implemented, the infrastructure plan, even the families plan, a lot of this stuff is stuff that he ran on in the general, particularly the pandemic relief, direct payments, et cetera. So in many ways, he's executing more of what he said in the general election, but he's definitely not where he was in the primary. And, we talked to Kathleen Friedel, this historian, many moons back. And, this was before anyone seriously, I think, was talking about a potential FDR type presidency, right? And that is something that seems to be coming up more and more. And I actually had people, some of our commenters sort of like, in certain things, laugh at me and say, yeah, the FDR president, whatever. Well, I mean, I'm not saying he isn't there yet, but the fact that potential is even being talked about, even exists, is just light years away from where we were 100 days ago when he stepped into office, right? So, yeah.
So just for context, Iowa was at the very beginning of February 2020. And then South Carolina was, New Hampshire was, 2-3 weeks later. And then South Carolina, I think, was a week later at the very beginning of March, right? The first closure didn't happen in California until March 15. And that was the first time that anybody closed in the country, right? So the sort of defining contests, which were Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, all happened before anybody had any inkling that everything would change. And everything did change virtually overnight. And so at that point, you had Bernie Sanders sort of like, limp along for a while, but again, he saw the reality, he saw the pandemic, the importance of beating Donald Trump, and he ceded to Joe Biden in a way that he refused to do so for Hillary Clinton. And it was for the best. It all worked out. And we were able to sort of move fairly quickly into the general election. Now, you're right that the pandemic changed everything. And so we had this weird political historical anomaly where the candidate actually ran in the middle during the primary and then ran to the opposite end, to the left, in a general election. You always have the opposite, right? You always, you got to win the primary base, and then you sort of got to appeal to broader America. He felt comfortable advocating for a more progressive agenda and solution than he would have clearly otherwise without the pandemic. And so he took that opportunity. None of us, I think, saw that coming. I don't think I trusted him. And, in fact, I think we've written about it, right? Where he was talking about a $2 trillion sort of relief bill. And we knew, it's all going to get whittled down. In the end, it's going to be $900 million because they want Republican votes. And then not a single Republican's going to vote for it. Like that was right. The playbook that we saw during the Obama years, time and time again. And that's what we expected. And then he did that sort of shift, that narrative shift that is so revolutionary in American domestic politics here in the modern era, which is he redefined bipartisanship. That's, I believe, the single biggest contributor to where we are today and to what is becoming a very successful Biden presidency. Is he stopped, it wasn't about what Mitch McConnell said was bipartisan, because Mitch McConnell wielded that like one of his strongest weapons against President Obama, was that Obama's desperate need for bipartisanship to bring people together with right. people who did not really have any interest, and he saw that as a weakness.
This is where I say, and the phrase finally came to me: Biden is being a president who's got nothing to prove. Right? He's not worried about proving bipartisanship. He's not worried. He's just trying to do what's right by the country. I mean, I honestly believe that, and what he thinks is necessary and possible in this moment. And the best thing that Mitch McConnell ever did for us was, number one, he's kind of a one-trick pony, and his trick has gotten pretty old. Like, everybody knows what they're doing. The other thing is that, and I don't want to go down the trick is, we're going to obstruct, right? We're going to string you along. We're going to pound you over the head with, you're not being bipartisan, blah, blah, blah. Then we're going to see if we can get whatever you're trying to do either completely dead in the water or trimmed down to the point where it's not half as effective as it ever could have been. And you're gonna have very little to show for it in the end, right? For getting, like, I don't know, 1, 2, maybe a handful of votes at best, right? So you can call it bipartisan. So you could call the stimulus, the $800 billion stimulus bill that Obama got through. Well, no, you couldn't. They actually didn't vote for that. They actually just had them trim it down and then didn't vote for it anyways. So, but by being consistently obstructionist, consistently, we're never going to do anything, consistently the party of no, and then the party that attacked the Capitol, and then the party that, majority of which wouldn't vote to certify Joe Biden's election, and the party that just became ridiculous in terms of its, how hypocritical it was on things like deficit spending and stuff like that. They've just become, they just kind of freed up Democrats to be like, who are you people? Like, why are we even responding to you? And I think that's, Joe Biden has taken full advantage of that. Well, if these party leaders are going to be this ridiculous, then can I put through an agenda that actually is popular with 2/3 or more of the country? And the answer to that question so far is yes. Now, the question is, how much more of it can he get through? And I will say, I wrote this piece over the weekend, and I said that Biden was was within reach of historic greatness, and that in and of itself was just bizarro world compared to where we were 100 days ago. But the question is whether or not he can actually get there, right? And everybody said, "Well, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, it's over." And I just want to say, before, just so I don't miss a chance to say this, I think he could still achieve historic greatness and a shifting of the playing field, the economic playing field in particular, by getting most of what he wants in the American Jobs Plan and the Americans Family Plan, or a lot of it, through Congress without having to eliminate the filibuster. He just needs to get Sinema and Manchin on board. Now, it's not going to be, we already know, like, if they manage to do this, it's not going to be a 28% tax rate for corporations the way Biden suggested. It probably will end up at 25% because that's what Joe Manchin wants. But who cares at the moment? If he can get a lot of those priorities through that will help so many people, that will help bring back and rebuild the middle class, that will lift so many people out of poverty and put them within reach of the middle class, that I'm not concerned about 25 versus 28%. And that is possible without filibuster reform. I think that is still achievable.
There's not a single voter that cares about whether the tax rate is 25 or 28, or whether the deficit is this 100 billion or that 100 billion. They don't care. They care, how is government helping me? And this is what's so critical. What's amazing to me is his ability to go with that Republican support really flies in the face of both his primary campaign, but also his general campaign, because he kept talking about all the Republicans that he worked with in the Obama years. And now you would go and look at those Republicans, and it'd be like Arlen Specter, who actually turned into a Democrat, Olympia Snowe, who's no longer in Congress, John McCain, who passed away. So the people that he supposedly worked with are not even there anymore. And it was a different Republican Party, an obstructionist Republican Party, but not as disciplined and scared as this one is today. And he never hinted, he never dog whistled that he, would ever go at it alone. He was very adamant that he wanted to bring people together and be bipartisan. and no wink winks at us, no sort of, nodding glance to make us feel better. Like, he sold it. And I don't know if he actually believed it at the time, because history suggests he didn't. History suggests he came in with the lessons he learned from the Obama years, having been on that front row seat to those negotiations. And it's like, no, I'm not gonna let them destroy my presidency and my party like they did then. And Obama actually had a 60-seat majority at one point, 59 after the Massachusetts special election. Biden has a 50-50 Senate with Joe Manchin, and he's still accomplishing what he is. And again, I think a big part of that is the fact that he's an old white guy. If it was President Harris or President Warren, I think Joe Manchin would be ecstatic to obstruct that agenda. I don't think either of those two would have a chance.
Right. That would totally be true. But Obama also, Obama had different considerations, and he had different personal, considerations and things he was trying to, prove to the country, to himself, whatever. But he didn't go. He had the majorities to do. Look, they never did. They could have done a second reconciliation bill, and they never did. They could have gone after trying to do more things by reconciliation, and they never did. I mean,
Carrie, they were laughing at the idea that you could use budget reconciliation for the Affordable Care Act, because we were writing about that extensively at the time. And people literally laughed at us, saying, "You guys don't know anything about how the Senate works. You need 60 votes."
Yeah, right.
You didn't.
No. So anyway, I mean, I just think that Joe Biden grew into this moment. And I think it's that simple. I don't think there's a moment where a flip switched, right? I don't think it's that type of thing. I think it's the pandemic got worse. The economy got worse. The Republican Party got more and more ridiculous and fringe, throughout the entire time. And suddenly he's in a situation where I think, he's willing. He's shown over and over again that he's willing to change. I mean, just look at the refugee cap thing, right? They came out like a few weeks ago, and they were like, well, we're only going to do, 15,000. We're going to keep the refugee cap at 15,000, which is where Trump left it. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, it wasn't even, let's keep it at that number. It's let's leave the Trump policy in place.
Yeah, right. That's right. Exactly. Let's leave the Trump. And they were doing other things. And then, there was a big uproar over that for very good reason. And within the same day, they sort of walked it back and said, look, we're the only thing we're doing, we were making some changes. We left that in place while we were reconsidering the policy. And then they came out, this morning, and said, we're going to move that to what they had originally said they would move it to, which was the cap. They're setting the refugee cap now at 62,500, I think. I mean, that's in a matter of weeks. And basically they said, there have been instance after instance where where the administration has put something out, and, it's not like super material to Joe Biden as a person. And the White House is willing to go back and say, look, we're going to reconsider this, and then come out with a more progressive policy. That never happened in the Obama administration, ever.
They would dig in.
They would dig in, and it would take years and protests and, lots of anti-Obama, from the left, in order to get anything progressive through the Obama administration. And that's just not what we're looking at here. And thank goodness, because it is past time. What this midterm election is going to come down to is whether Joe Biden's redefinition of bipartisanship as putting through an agenda that most Americans agree with, right? Roughly 2/3 of Americans over and over again agree with the policies he's pushing forward and the pandemic relief that he's already passed. And the question is going to be, if you do enough good things that the American people want, can you overcome voter suppression that Republicans are bound and determined to bring to the 2022 election? That's what we're going to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an interesting little dynamic that's also arising that I think bears keeping an eye on. conservatives are starting to sort of realize that those of us on the left are really pleased with Joe Biden. So I've seen it on Fox News that, because there was that narrative that Joe Biden is a puppet of AOC. And, everybody laughed it off because that was so freaking stupid. And even today, that's freaking stupid. But what they're doing is they're going, aha, AOC said something nice about Joe Biden. And so did Bernie Sanders, because both of them have basically said, wow, this is great so far.
Right.
Byron York, who's a conservative writer at the columnist at The Examiner, which is a conservative newspaper, actually had a whole piece, and he cited my piece on I was wrong about Joe Biden, and he's like, aha, conservatives need to start making the case that Joe Biden actually isn't a moderate, because all the polls still say people think he's a moderate, and that he's actually this like radical socialist liberal. And I find that kind of hilarious, right? Because if you look at the policies that Joe Biden has passed, they all have 50 to 70% approval ratings, right?
Right.
So there's a possibility that they may very well say all those things that you like, that's socialism. And people may go, oh, socialism's kind of cool then.
I just think they're not going to think it's socialism. I think that people can get scared into thinking when they're uncomfortable with something, when they don't agree with something, they're like, oh, that's socialist. But if they agree with something they want, like a $1,400 direct payment so they can put food on the table, that's not socialism to them. Right.
What do they call it? Good government?
Well, right. It's big government. But no, I mean, seriously, I think as long as what Democrats are pushing through are popular policies, I have a really hard time believing that the socialist label will stick. And the reason is because no one, I mean, maybe people on the far left think they're socialists, but the vast majority of the country doesn't believe that they're socialists at heart. And if they like something and agree with it, they're not going to think it's socialist, even if Republicans try to tell them it is. Because they're like, well, I agree with it and like it, and I'm not a socialist, and neither is Joe Biden.
Well, who was it? Was it Congresswoman Boebert in Colorado that said that universal pre-K was communist?
Yeah.
You know who else had universal pre-kindergarten? The Soviet Union, right?
The Soviet Union, yeah. Let's not educate anyone. It's terrible. Education, I mean, for a long time, the Republican take on getting a 4-year college degree or going to college was basically that was bad news, because then suddenly you became liberal. So they're kind of anti-education to begin with. So
yeah, I wouldn't put that in the past tense. I think that is still the case today.
That's not right. So now they're just extending. We don't want pre-K either. They're just like, they're trying. I mean, Joe Biden's trying to lengthen out, right, how affordable education is and the time frame from which people can be educated in an affordable way, from pre-K all the way to 2 years of free community college and more help with a 4-year degree, right? And he's trying to extend that out. If Republicans could, they would just keep dumbing down the masses, right? They would be like, no, pre-K. They would be like, well, maybe we'll just do K through 8. That's what they. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, let's just get rid of high school public education. They seriously. And what is stunning? I mean, maybe this is a good time to like take a turn, but like what is stunning is the way that they have dumbed down the Republican base, right? The way that they have fed them lies, fed them misinformation, fed them disinformation, denied climate change, gone anti-science, etc. All of that stuff has come back to haunt them, because now the pitchforks are coming for them, right? That the base that they dumbed down, the base that they fed a bunch of toxic, non-fact-based sludge to, right, is now just one big conspiracy bubble, and it can turn on anyone at any moment, and none of them want to be in the line of getting turned on.
Yeah, it's a great time to make that shift over to Donald Trump's Republican Party, because I still don't understand how you have a one-term loser. There's only been 3 of those in the last 100 years. So that's like rarefied air of loserdom. So he never won the popular vote, right? So he actually lost both elections, and it's Republicans' advantage in working the institutional levers of power in this country to take power via undemocratic means is the reason they have any power at this point, from Congress all the way to the Supreme Court. And so you have a loser who has been deplatformed. It's literally like he rants and raves at weddings at his resort, right? To dozens of people. I mean, this is like the former leader of the free world, relegated to ranting like a lunatic at random people's weddings.
Right. Videos of Donald Trump just kind of randomly showing up in the middle of like a wedding or something that someone has had at Mar-a-Lago, and him ranting about the 2020 election and how there was a lot of fraud and everybody knows it, and all that stuff. And it's like the broken record of him over and over again about how he didn't lose. I mean, that is what we're talking about.
Right. And obviously Donald Trump got rid of any notion of ideology in the Republican Party, so much so that then he didn't even bother to field a platform in the 2020 Republican convention. They didn't even pretend to stand for anything beyond whatever Donald Trump thinks in that moment. And what's worse is this guy's a loser. He's clearly losing national attention because he just doesn't have the means to communicate. I was just looking at the recent presidential polling, and the 538 composite for Biden right now is 53% approval, 40% disapproval. Civics, which is our in-house data firm, has it actually tighter, has Biden 48% favorable, 46% unfavorable. But even that is plus, it's above, more people are approve of Joe Biden than disapprove. Donald Trump was never, ever better than 43% approved, 53% disapproved. Half of America always disapproved of Donald Trump his entire presidency. And that's where he is today, 42-55, 42 approved, 55 unfavorable views of Donald Trump.
Can I just add something here, a data point which I was looking at today? So ABC News just polled optimism for the coming year among people, and right now 64%, this roughly 2/3, right, of the country is feeling optimistic about the year to come. The last time that optimism even approached that level was in December of 2006 at 61%. Now think about that. That was just after Democrats retook the House and Nancy Pelosi was on the cusp of becoming the first female speaker, right? But you mentioned that 42% who approve of Donald Trump. When he was elected on the eve of 2016, just 42% of Americans felt optimistic about the country. In other words, the country overall didn't feel optimistic about where we were heading. And it's on the eve of something like that, right? That sheer pessimism that Donald Trump manages to get elected. And I think it's just so telling about, everything, every piece of who he is and how he managed to get into office. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So you have this person who is deeply unpopular, incredibly polarizing, and has no proven ability to get his vote out when he is not on the ballot. Democrats won big in 2017, 18, 19, and the special election in Georgia in the beginning of this year in 2021, right? When Trump is on the ballot, people show up. Like there's a whole phenomenon that now we know is very real of Trump-only voters, but he can't even turn them out. And I think that's what a lot of Republicans are really, they look at that hungrily. Like we want to get that, 72 million people who voted for Donald Trump?
74, I think is what 74. It was.
They want those people, even though they haven't turned out for anybody else. And Donald Trump hasn't shown any interest in party building. He's told people not to donate to Republicans or the Republican Party, just to him. He attacks John Boehner. He probably will attack John Boehner.
He would happily do it.
Yeah. So, McCarthy, the current Republican leader in the House, obviously McConnell in the Senate, he attacks his own party. He actually seems to have more fun attacking people. Like Republicans and black women are his favorite targets. Like that's what gets him up in the morning to attack, which is why he really has failed to grasp onto Joe Biden.
What a reason to live. I get up in the morning to attack people, and especially people of color, and especially people who are women, and especially anyone who's ever said a bad thing about me. That's why I wait. I mean, can you imagine? Oof, it's so gross. Anyway,
then you have conservative media who, since there's no Republican ideology, there's no cohesive message, they can't even argue against infrastructure because a lot of what's in this bill, Donald Trump actually had supported back in his dozens of infrastructure weeks. And so they're all fixated on cancel culture, right? Let's talk about Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head. And I don't know, they were talking about Snow White the other day. I don't know what's going on with Snow White. But that's right now seems to be what they want to focus on. And so you have a party, you have this clear sort of delineation between the parties now because Republicans haven't offered a single vote for key Democratic legislation. They're trying to take credit for a lot of it.
Right.
Republicans like, oh, get your restaurant bailout money, that they voted against.
Right.
But there's going to be a very clear case in 2022 between the party that actually is delivering and is giving people money, actual money in their pockets, and the party that wants to say, no, we're here to protect taxes for the businesses that we hate anyway because they are pro-democracy. I mean, they're right now a logical mess. And not that they've ever been great on logic, but this is like next level disunity and discord in that Republican coalition. And that's why you don't have any cohesiveness between their media arm, the legislative arm, Donald Trump over there yelling into the void. And they're paying attention. I still, Carrie, don't understand why they pay attention to Trump because they could have just ignored him and moved on and he'd be fine.
But it's too late. It's too late for that. It's too late. They had that 48-hour window after January 6th when McCarthy said, oh, but Trump bears some responsibility. And McConnell was, headed in the direction of trying to jam Trump. And then it just all switched. And what amazes me is that they have decided to hand their party over. Now, I'm going to make a distinction in a second between how, because I actually think that Trump is losing his influence, but Trump personally is, but the party is more beholden to Trumpism than it ever was, right? The party as a whole. But what's amazing to me is that GOP leaders handed their party over to Trumpism, tied it to Trump, who has never been interested in the Republican Party. He has never been interested. He is so much more focused on making the Liz Cheneys of the world pay because she won't spread his big lie, on making Mitch McConnell pay, because he at least hasn't spread his big lie. I mean, about election fraud, of course, and the election supposedly being stolen when he can't provide any evidence of that anywhere in 60 plus times to the courts, right, to the courthouse. So, but it's just unbelievable to me that they would have basically gifted the party to someone who couldn't care less about the party. I mean, it's crazy town what they've done. And Donald Trump has he got a phone interview on Fox News the last week, I think. And in that phone interview, he said, the Republicans should get rid of Mitch McConnell, right? Now, Mitch McConnell isn't in immediate danger. He's just been reelected in his home state, and there's no one else who's really capable of leading that caucus right now. I mean, people like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, everyone just hates them. So there's too much division even within the own Senate caucus right now for anyone to challenge Mitch McConnell's leadership there. But Donald Trump is more committed, I am certain of it, to making Mitch McConnell pay than he is to electing congressional majorities in the House or the Senate. And he would probably be very happy if he managed to doom the Senate Republicans' chances of retaking the majority, and managed to get maybe a couple of more, right-wing kind of flamethrowers into that Senate caucus to behead Mitch McConnell as leader. And then, I think he fancies, he'll never say differently because he'll lose all influence if he does. I think he fancies the idea of then running for president in 2024. But he would happily have McConnell not retake the majority and have him dethroned as leader. And that's more, I guarantee you, that's more important. Retribution is more important to him by far than the Republican Party, the success of the Republican Party, and the success of the nation, frankly.
Yeah, I think you're right. And when you look at that Senate map, it really it is the 2020 battleground state and 2024, right? It's Arizona, Florida, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. I mean, it's you overlay it. It's the exact same states. And so if Republicans need to elect, there's not a lot of margin. These are going to be 1-2 point results, either one way or the other. I mean, we just resigned. They're going to be dogfights. And so if Donald Trump is meddling, for example, he has frozen the field in Georgia because he wants Herschel Walker to run in Georgia. Now, who is Herschel Walker? He's an ex-football player in Texas who just happens to be a black person who supports Trump. And Trump, being Trump, thinks, oh, well, the Republican Raphael Warnock is black, therefore we need a black to also challenge him, and that's how we win. So Georgia's a big state. I'm sure there are plenty of African-American, black Georgians, but that one said something nice about him on Fox News. Therefore, let's import him from Texas to Georgia, where he probably knows nothing about Georgia, and that'll be the person we field. And this is going to be Trump's version of strategy in all these states. Right. And there is an opportunity there for us to have a little bit of a leg up. I mean, even if it's just 1-2 points, because the wrong person is nominated, can be a big factor in what is going to be an incredibly tight election. But if we win the Senate, if we win bigger majorities, then we have things like not worrying about Joe Manchin every freaking vote. And then you create some breathing space, DC statehood.
The House, like the House is still a problem, and I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But this is, I'm always looking for what's the path. How could we potentially get it done? It's not easy, right? There's no sure things at all. But it's possible. Whoops, sorry. Hope no one on the podcast heard that. It just blew their ears out. Anyway, but it's possible that Joe Biden could get a lot of his jobs and family plans through, not all of it, but a lot of it, hopefully, through, it's possible, right? On a party line vote, through reconciliation. People are largely thrilled with the agenda that Biden has enacted. We managed to keep the House, which I actually think is a harder prospect than keeping the Senate. Increase the Senate majority by 1 or 2 votes. Yes, no, I mean, this is my dream, right? I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but this is the straight, and then potentially, this is your way up the middle, right? You manage to then get a little bit of breathing room on something like the For the People Act, or, the George Floyd Justice Act, or, any one of these, DC statehood, any one of these super important things that we need to get done that looks like we can't get done through reconciliation, right? This is the way that he could become a completely transformative president. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but people are so fixated on, we need to remove the filibuster right now. We need to Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. What we need them to do right now is to help Joe Biden pass this historic jobs and families plan, this really monumental shift in the economic playing field to reward work, as Biden says, instead of wealth. And then maybe we get a chance to do something really big in the second half of Biden's term. So I have to ask you, because I think you have a much better take on this, what you think the chances are where we are in the House. Like, I really think that is the tougher sell at the moment.
Yeah, there's the House is quite interesting because we actually don't know. We don't know what the districts will look like because of redistricting, because of reapportionment. We're going to have brand new districts everywhere, except the single seat like Vermont and who else is single at this point? States like that. Wyoming.
Wyoming.
But
but Republicans didn't pick up quite as many seats as we thought they might in the redistricting process, right? I mean, we thought that based on the census that they were going to pick up more, especially in Texas and Arizona and Florida.
Yeah, you can't. It's actually hard. It's actually much more complicated than that because a lot of that depends on how the districts are drawn, who draws the districts.
No, but I just mean the census data. Data.
Just because Texas gets, let's say they got 2 new seats, but let's say they got 3, it doesn't automatically mean 3 new Republican seats.
No, I understand that.
Right.
No, but look, if they had gotten 3 new Republican seats, they could have drawn 1 seat that they knew was where all the Democratic votes would sink into, and then they probably could have fashioned 2 so that they come that were Republican leaning, and so that they come out 1 ahead, right? But instead, they just got 2. So now they have in Texas. We're talking about.
Yeah.
So now they have more competition.
Right.
I just don't think they came out as favorably from the census data as they thought they would.
Yeah,
Republicans.
Probably. Right, correct. And they have an advantage in who draws the districts, right? So they'll draw 36% of the districts. Democrats only draw like 18% of the districts, and then the rest is nonpartisan sort of systems in place. So there's a big question mark about how these districts are drawn. Then there's actually decisions that Republicans need to make in places like Texas, where they can guarantee they can draw fewer really red states to lock in, a certain majority, or they can take a few districts and make them like, middle, pink, so that they're likely to win, but are actually potentially competitive down the line, which is what happened in the 2010 map, where the current map is actually very, very competitive. We lost an opportunity in 2020 because of that massive Trump vote, but that map is actually, because those suburbs, which they considered to be solid Republican districts, suddenly became very purpley. So they have to make a decision. Do we want to try to get as many seats as possible and potentially lose a few of those in a bad year? Or do we just want to like lock in a bunch of 60-70% Republican districts, which means that we'll have fewer at any given time, but we're not losing. That's like locked in. Right. So they have to make some decisions like that. And the big question, though, and this is where I suspect that Republicans who are drawing districts are going to be really, really flummoxed, is do you draw those districts based on the Trump turnout of 2020, or do you draw them on the 2018 no Trump turnout? And that has huge implications, right? Because we don't know if that Trump turnout will turn out. It didn't turn out to as great of an extent in Georgia as liberals did. So in the end, even if they draw maps that are favorable to them, a lot is going to depend on who turns out. So they have an edge, no doubt about it. At this point, I would say they have a better than even chance of retaking the House, not just because of redistricting, but because of historical trends where the party in power always loses seats in a big way in the first midterm of their presidency. And, I think it averages like 35 points, the 35 seats.
Yes, but except in cases, right, where there's some sort of big crisis type thing, like FDR. I know that we gained seats after FDR took over as president. You don't think so?
I don't think the first midterm. He ended up gaining later because he won 4 times.
Oh, is it later? Sorry.
Yeah. George Bush is the exception. In 2002, after 9/11. So a year after 9/11, Republicans gained seats because they painted Democrats as being weak, even though Trump's the one who ignored the intelligence report on bin Laden. they were able to blame Democrats. So there is a lot in question, and there's just a general mayhem of the conservative movement right now. And it's, if you really look at everything Donald Trump has touched, it's been chaotic, right? His businesses go out of business and are bankrupted. His campaigns are a freaking mess. He lost his reelection. I mean, he
Look
does
what he
not.
did to Georgia. Look what he did to Georgia. I mean, Georgia's just in the Georgia runoffs, right? Everybody was like, well, historically in special elections, Republicans always win them. Well, he just turned that whole thing into just a massive piece of chaos between going after the state election officials and, you know, and both of the senators tried to be little Trump mini-me's, both GOP senators. And it didn't matter because he was telling all of his people that the vote was rigged and that the election system was crap and that they couldn't trust it. And guess who didn't turn out? His people. I mean,
it was Marjorie Taylor Greene's district had the biggest drop off, which is the most conservative district. And this is very much system wide in the Republican Party. For example, the Florida Republicans, they control government, just passed a Georgia style bill to limit mail voting in the state. Now, you know what the funny thing is, Carrie, is that the people who use mail voting in Florida are seniors. In fact, Republicans
conservative seniors.
Yes, they pioneered the use of mail voting to make it easier for their voters to vote.
Yeah, they spent decades pushing mail-in voting. Republican Party in Florida,
people, right? That their ballot was going to show up, that they didn't need to do anything, that ballot was coming, and made it part of it's just muscle memory. And in fact, I saw an article, I think Florida Sentinel, that said people are like, yeah, there's all these elections, I just wouldn't vote, but the ballot shows up, so why not, right? Which actually is a good thing. I mean,
right.
Even if it's Republicans voting, I think everybody should get that ballot mailed to them. They just killed that because Trump has decided that mail voting cost him the election. He won Florida. Mail voting did not hurt him in Florida. Right. But because they created this culture where mail voting is the enemy, they are literally destroying it in places where it is their advantage.
Right.
So there is much
where they've spent decades cultivating it in Florida in particular. I mean, and now
we have key House, Senate, and governor races in Florida next year, and so we'll get a test of how much they've damaged their own chances. But what it does mean is that Donald Trump has taken over a party and he's doing to it what he's done to everything else. Now, he still has that special ability to define narratives, to get people to follow him, even though he's a loser. It's quite impressive.
Right, but is it going to be less dominant? He's a little less dominant than he was.
He is. He's as powerful as the Republican Party lets him be. And for whatever reason, they're letting him be.
Well, and I think that all of them, I actually think in his absence, what's happened is they've all had to become him in order to keep, his people sort of engaged, right? Because he's not on Twitter saying something like every day that's just blasphemous, that is, fans love and whatever. So like everybody has gone more right, including the state parties, including, Kevin McCarthy, including Mitch McConnell, frankly. Like the whole party has gone, going after corporations and stuff like that. This is
it's not even going right. Stuff. It's not even going right.
No,
they're going to whatever Donald Trump is momentarily obsessed with.
Right. So let me just, I know we're getting to the end here. We have a few more minutes, but don't want to leave this conversation without saying whatever the historical trends are, we are in ahistorical times. Republicans are doing a bunch of stuff trying to suppress the vote and specifically targeted racist stuff, trying to suppress the vote of people of color, of young voters, and of Democrats more generally, right? But it's not like they're doing it smartly, which is Florida is the exact case example of they just, all of a sudden there's this fervor to do change the laws, and they actually totally sabotage something that they've been relying on for decades to win very close elections in that state. So we have no idea. The other thing is what you brought up. They're going to have this advantage in redrawing districts for sure. But we don't even know who the GOP base is anymore. Republicans don't know who the GOP base is anymore. And they're so badly running around, chasing their tails, trying to keep those voters, those Trump voters, engaged with no guarantee that they're going to turn out, because they typically haven't turned out when Trump hasn't been on the ballot. And at the same time, the further like fringe they get, they've been trading up very reliable suburban voters who go to the polls in special elections. So they've been like, it is so far outside of anything we've ever seen that I don't think anyone knows, and no one will know until it happens, what is going to happen in the midterms. It is possible that Democrats could keep, the chambers of Congress, and it is possible that they could lose both, and we just don't know.
Yeah, history said that Donald Trump was going to be reelected because presidents are almost always reelected, right? History can be a guide. History is not determinative of the future. And like you said, the pieces are there for us to hold on. The pieces are there to expand our lead in the Senate or lose it, but they're there to get a bigger, safer majority, one that would eliminate the filibuster. The pieces are there to win the House. And so it is going to be incumbent of us as progressives to stay engaged, as we did in Georgia, when all history said our people are not going to turn out. That's what history said. And history was right about history. And we overcame those trends and said it's not determinative. So Georgia winning the presidency, we can do it. The midterm elections during the Trump years. So I'm actually pretty excited about next year. I'm excited at the promise of giving Biden, who has proven to be a potentially transformative president. He's only limited by what Congress will allow him to do. That's critical. And so we need to fight as hard as we can, because they're going to be fighting as hard as they can to kneecap him. I mean, that's their job. That's what Republicans do, and they're going to do what Republicans do. If we turn out, I actually have really, really high hopes for us. So, Carrie, thank you so much. Everybody, I hope you found this to be an informative conversation. I'm actually really, really, really fascinated by both these topics, and definitely read Daily Kos. You can see what Carrie and other great Daily Kos writers are writing about, tracking the administration, tracking the travails of the Republican Party. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks to Walter for producing the show. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. You can always talk to us at dailykos.com or on Twitter at Daily Kos. See you next week.